First Expo has been part of the ownership family of Jack Cooper since 2009 and has served as executive chairperson since 2014. You know this company, it's one of the most important, of course, finished vehicle logistics players in North America, typically delivering up to 4 million cars a year. Alongside a career in logistics, she's also been active in politics and including runs for state and national office. I'm very pleased to welcome back to our event Sarah Amico from Jack Cooper. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thank you so much. Our next maybe doesn't need that much introduction. He's been involved in the industry for more than 40 years. Maybe it even feels like longer sometimes. Key roles in shipping. Wallenius Wilhelmsen worked at SSA Marine, leading vehicle logistics, and he joined RPM last year as Chief Commercial Officer, leading the company's growth in targeted business areas and new markets. Very pleased that Bill Kerrigan from RPM could join us. All right, Bill, thanks for coming. Cheers, Bill. And finally, our next speaker has been with Nissan for 10 years, with roles of increasing responsibility in both manufacturing and logistics. Had roles like Director of Body and Stamping in Canton, and currently responsible for vehicle logistics across North America, but also for supply chain systems across the supply chain. J.S. Bolton from Nissan. Thanks so much for being with us, J.S. Okay, thanks again, everyone. And same as before, I'll have questions, but we will have it open for audience as we go over the next 30, 40 minutes or so. If we look at efficiency factors, such as load factors, asset utilization, dwell time, I want to get a lay of the land. Where does the traffic light system look right now for you, JS? Is it red, yellow, green? Where are you seeing worsening, stable, improving KPIs? Can you give us a sense of how the network looks for you right now?
Well, I don't want to repeat what Nick and Rory just said, but I could have said a lot of the things almost verbatim to them. We're struggling with capacity every mode. Ro-ro, deep sea, ro-ro, short sea from Mexico, rail cars in Mexico, rail cars in the US, particularly tri-levels, as well as driver capacity on the Holloway side. So we're seeing struggles with all of those. Sometimes one will be worse than another, but really it's across the board.
Yeah.
And particularly as we ramp up volume, coming out of COVID, coming out of semiconductors, we know that we have very ambitious production plans and we need all of our partners to be there to support those.
Sarah from Jack Cooper. I mean, maybe not surprised, but it's good to get a sense of that, but what about from Jack Cooper's side?
Yeah, I think from our side, we're just sitting at sort of the center of the storm in terms of what's happened in supply chain writ large over the last few years, right? We're at the intersection of manufacturing, rail, ports, the driver shortage in trucking, which we've been dealing with for some years. So we've got a really good bird's eye view of sort of how all of those pieces have collided in finished vehicle logistics. And I think we're looking at this as sort of a moment where the industry evolves a little bit. There are two aspects, for example, on the driver shortage piece that JS mentioned. We have recruitment, bringing in new drivers, and Rory talked about this earlier, sort of bringing in a new generation of truckers and how we market that job to young people. But there's also retention. And on the retention side, we've sort of maxed out. We're at over 95% retention of our drivers after year one, and we're at about 80% overall, including the people who are CDL holders who maybe wash out of car haul training. So we really do have to look at that recruitment piece and bringing in a new generation of drivers. I've been really fortunate to work on a task force set up by the White House with the Department of Defense, where we're now pitching truck drivers and logistics, whether it's dispatch or other careers, to our veterans as they're leaving the service and returning to civilian life. And I think as we sort of pilot that and roll it out across the country, there's tremendous potential to bring in an entirely new generation of drivers. On the equipment side, I think the discussion earlier this morning was also apropos. We're looking at, let's call it, to make the math easy, because it's still early in the morning, $300,000 per tractor trailer combination. If you need to put 250 of those to work, it's $150 million of capital and something that's somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 12 to 15-year assets. If you need 500, you're doubling it, right? So these are long-term expensive investments, and I think the transparency with the manufacturers now and with our partners in the 3PL world, in the railroad side, really need to be open about how we're going to make those economics work for everyone at the table. So I think you're at sort of this moment of inflection where we see capacity in flux, but there are potential solutions. But to be clear, I don't think there's solutions that anyone in this room or any segment of the industry in this room can solve without all of the other pieces being at the table as well.
Very good points. Bill?
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, over 40 years I've been in this business. I've never seen the disruption that we've had in the last 3 years, right? We've really looked at the way we produce cars, the way we ship cars. I mean, the supply chains have gotten longer and longer, right? With the growth in Mexico, with the imports, we're still doing, what, 4 to 5 million imports a year. The ports have, no one envisioned the short sea that we were going to be doing, which again puts strain on the ports and capacity. We've been fortunate at RPM to develop some new non-traditional, I would say, capacity, which is complementary to what's been out there over there. But it's a process every day. It's a process working with our customers to make sure that they get what they ask for and we can deliver on what we've promised.
Absolutely. JS, if we talk about network design, where are you focused on opportunities to make changes right now to find, as we said, I mean, we can't flip a switch and put rail cars back in, or trucks, as Sarah outlined, the capital investment there. Where are you focused most on finding efficiencies? Where are you seeing those opportunities?
So we're trying to think outside the box. What the industry has done the last 30 years isn't necessarily what it's going to look like the next 30 years. So I'll give a few examples from Nissan. One is, traditionally, when we bid out trucking lanes, we bid them out based on state boundaries. If you were being awarded our business, you would take on, let's say, the entire state of Virginia. We're not doing that anymore. We're going to be bidding by population clusters, which obviously align to our dealership network. So we're going to be looking at, the DC area. Northern Virginia is very different in terms of market dynamics from southwestern Virginia, and it might be a different trucking carrier that's the right partner for those. So I'd say we're looking at how to bid our network to get those win-wins with our carriers where it's good for them and good for us. Sarah brought up data transparency. If we can find out where carriers might have a backhaul where something that we're doing fits nicely in their network, that's an advantage to both them and us to find something that increases efficiency. I mentioned dealer pickup in the previous panel, solutions like that. Just maybe the ports we've always gone into aren't necessarily the ones for the next 30 years. And we're reevaluating all of that as well.
So, I mean, I think it's one of the most important messages. We don't just do it anymore because we've always done it that way. So those are some really practical, great examples. Sarah, just some reflections on them. I mean, how can you help JS or others see where those backhauls are? I mean, it seems like something that we would all want to be able to do.
Well, I think you have to think about it from two perspectives, because it does work, and that is the nature of logistics, right? We're the ultimate network economics industry. But it only works when we have that stability of capacity planning. If we give a backhaul lane to an OEM, and it's based on that out and back pricing structure so that we provide both customers with relief on the rates, and then one of those two is rationalized away, we actually lose on both ends. So there also has to be an understanding of sort of what is the term of that contract, and sort of making sure that, again, we have that transparency to say, these are the lanes where we're giving you this pricing, not based on the term of the contract, but based on the terms that this is our understanding of the network design. And I do think that's indicative of sort of the larger change in our industry, which is Capacity on the haul-away side has been much harder to plan for because of some of the upstream supply chain issues. And so we're trying to re-engineer our business model a little bit where we can provide much more real-time or just-in-time incremental capacity and lift. But doing that is a different business model, right? For those of you who remember Blockbuster in the room, it was a different economic model than Netflix is. And I think we're looking at a similar transition where we need to think really creatively about how we create shared wins and shared savings, but we also make sure that on the carrier side, we're making enough margin to reinvest in a fleet so that you have that stability in the supply chain that Rory talked about earlier.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Please do.
So she mentioned pricing and how we've traditionally done contracts. I think that's another area where we can think outside the box. Time to dealers is so important right now. Dealer inventory is still low. We care so much about lead time, but traditionally a lot of the contracts in the industry aren't structured so that there are incentives to pay more when things are very urgent, other than just on the spot market. So I think when we look at pricing structures, we can also change that by thinking a little bit more outside the box.
And JS, I think it's actually one layer worse than that, because not only is there not sort of an incremental price for a lot of those priority moves, but then it actually makes the carrier appear worse in the statistics to a 3PL or an OEM because you have incremental aging on the older units, even though you're doing exactly what you're being asked to do. So again, making sure that all sides have that visibility so that the OEM has the maximum flexibility to spend their dollar in the way that it helps them the most.
Really interesting dynamic here. I'm wondering, Bill, from your point of view, where does RPM fit in that kind of mix? Where would you recommend that the industry goes to fill those gaps?
Well, it's still, and we've talked about this a lot of times, it's still about visibility in the supply chain, right? I mean, back in the day when a lot of dealers held a lot of cars that were not necessarily sold, it may not have been as urgent to get them there. Right now, every car is bought, right? Every car that's getting to a dealer has somebody's name on it. So having that visibility ahead of time for us, so we can make proper loads and get those cars and meet the SLAs that have been given to us, that's critical right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is, as we say, a paradigm shift, a business model shift. JS is actually saying, I want to, but certainly willing to pay more for the right priority. But as you say, like to find it within the boundaries of a contract, Amazon Prime, so to speak, in vehicle logistics. I think we don't necessarily have all the answers here, but I'm interested to understand where are those gaps for you, JS, to start in visibility that aren't allowing some of these things to happen? Everyone seems to say they want to, they think it's a good idea, but somehow the visibility just doesn't seem to come.
I think it ties to transparency. Nissan has a team of data scientists that are looking at our network and doing all sorts of cool analysis. And RPM and Jack Cooper also have, programs and technology to do load planning, but yet we're not as connected as we could be. And so we're each making siloed decisions without understanding how it affects the rest of the network. The being maybe not happy about paying more, but what we found is, this goes back to network design, is we're paying more anyway.
Yeah.
So to use the example of state-by-state bidding I mentioned earlier, if we bid out a state and there's some dealers that are incredibly inconvenient for the carriers will not take those loads and those units will sit and age. And when they get up to 15 days of aging, we'll pay for a backup carrier. So we're paying more anyway. We would just, and I'll reiterate what Nick said earlier, if you say you're gonna do something, please do it. We would much rather have bid those dealers to a different carrier at maybe a higher price to get the timeliness we need. But the data sharing, if the contracted carrier had just said, hey, we can't do these within the time, or we need XYZ to do this, the transparency would have gone a long way for our business.
Yeah. Sarah, you raised earlier, I mean, in some ways you're partly decentralized in the current kind of setup to do that. But do you also find, I mean, it's also a conversation that maybe needs to be had at a more holistic level, because an OEM might suffer from in one lane from a decision like that. You might have to wait a little bit longer, but then get a price benefit, or the other way around, right? So is it just that this type of holistic discussion isn't yet happening? I mean, we have it here, but what needs to happen for us to go to the next stage with it?
I think these discussions are happening. I mean, we're really fortunate. We have great partners that we've had, for decades in terms of customer relationships. In one case, almost 96 years, which is longer than most of us can expect to be on this planet. So I think that kind of long-term view is very much focused on trust building. But what I think is challenging is sometimes there are silos of information, but more importantly, there are different incentives. So the operations side at a manufacturer or a particular plant location may have needs that our people on the ground can meet very quickly, but there's sort of a wall between that and the commercial side that's actually working with us on setting up those incentives and pricing structures. So, one of the things we've tried to do recently is create that real-time data flow. So putting a dashboard together for customers so that they can actually in real time see what on-time delivery looks like, how it's tracking to the expectations. And for anything that doesn't look like it's meeting the standard, they can actually drill down into specific units and specific areas. Why? What happened? Because of course, if you have a plant that's down for some reason, whether it's a model changeover or a supply chain issue, you're going to have less on-time delivery in that location. So providing really quick, real-time information flows, I think is the thing that is going to lead us to better versions of those discussions. It's not that they're not happening, it's that I don't think they have the depth yet. We're going to need to face this moment where the supply chain is never going back to what it looked like before COVID. There's no going back to normal. We are creating the new normal in real time.
Do you think, just a quick follow-up on that, that transparency needs to come with trust too? Because if you're going to be that transparent to your customers about where you have and don't have capacity, I mean, you're giving away the cards to some extent as well, right? So that trust seems really important. Maybe it's an observation from my side, but I think how would you have a 96-year relationship, and by the way, if anyone can sign a 100-year contract and beat that, I think that should be our goal. But anyway, I'm trying to say is, do we have further to go to get that sort of trust level?
Yeah, but you have to leap, right? It's not different than any of us in the room who've ever gotten married, right? You don't really know how it's going to play out, but you know that it's worth the effort in profound ways. And I think that's the way we need to think about it. Traditionally, for example, I think rail and truckaway have sort of had this competitive tension, right? But the reality is we are not competing. For like 95% of lanes, there is one that makes more sense for rail and there's one that makes more sense for truck. What we actually are is integrally linked partners in our customer success. And we've taken that model, particularly in our Mexico operations, with Ferromex, for example. We have an incredible partnership where we have full transparency, and as a result, we've been able to design new models of operating in that market. And I hope we'll similarly be able to do that here in the United States.
Bill?
I think what's really interesting is that you forget the population shifts in this country, and everybody's selling into the same markets. And so you're not going to build a new railhead that's next to another existing railhead. So that railhead maybe have capacity problems, right? But literally, if you look where people are moving and where people are living today, it's that Southeast corridor, it's the Texas area, it's California. Everybody's trying to sell in the same markets. So when you have that happening, and you have OEM 1, OEM 2, OEM 3 all competing for that kind of capacity in those lanes, it's going to create some sort of opportunity, I would say, for people. And this is what we're working with now. So we constantly have to sit with our customers and look at network design and figure out how best it's going to happen. But if everybody has an urgent vehicle that's got to be delivered, then that's going to affect the price point too, right? So it's something we have to work on as an industry, which I still think we're very siloed in, that we don't have, and I'm sure we'll talk about this some more, we don't have that go-to organization where we can have visibility of all what's in the business, and we need that now, because if we have that, there are software tools out there now that can help do this design. AI is going to be part of this as we go forward. So we got to have some place where we can all talk together and not have to worry about antitrust and things like that.
Yeah, it's definitely the point I wanted to raise, and maybe starting there with you, JS, because you mentioned you have data scientists, you're responsible for the systems side of it, putting a lot of effort into Nissan data and understanding what that means. I mean, first of all, is that helping you in this scenario? But second of all, for the big bang, do you need that to open up, or your data scientists to be able to work with others or in a pooled share of data?
So absolutely it's helping us. You know, Sarah mentioned dashboards where you see real-time, day-to-day KPIs, and we have that for our network now. And we're moving from the, stage one is understand the data, to stage two is use the data to be proactive and do things with it. And it's very exciting. But I think we just see Nissan data. There are some industry organizations, but more on the rail side, which is protected, as most folks in the room know, from antitrust with the TTX arrangement. So there is some industry data out there through ALEC, which we are attempting to use to help our network. But I think the more industry data we have, the more we can make decisions that don't just help Nissan, but help our carriers and help velocity of asset utilization throughout the network, which will help everyone.
And I think, and it's come up in other discussions as well, useful data through something like ALEC, but then how can it also be in a format system visualization that actually we could use? It's less helpful if it's in 20 different spreadsheets that people don't have the time to look at. As you mentioned, Bill, there are tools available. You could probably put it into ChatGPT and see what it has to say. Actually, everything I've said today is directly from ChatGPT. I don't actually exist anymore. My company outsourced me to AI. So if you don't like the jokes, you can blame AI there too. But I think it is an important point on the antitrust side that we can't get around that. I mean, that is important. I mean, JS, do you see that as a barrier, or can we find other solutions? Do you think that's a third-party job that needs to come into play, or is it something the industry can actually work together more on?
I think if we don't go with a third party, we need to sort of agree on some standards that will make it easier to share data. 20 different spreadsheets. You don't need data coming from each OEM in a different format. I think the carriers and the railroads would appreciate standardized formats. And for us, we don't need information coming from the carriers in 30 different formats. So I think there's some ways as an industry we can establish standards that make data analysis easier and more streamlined.
Jack Cooper has, I think, still the best ever named tool, the Da Vinci tool. So, can you tell us a little bit how that's helping you? But again, is it possible to scale that even more if you were able to feed more data into it? Are you working with other certain ways to do that?
Yeah, when we bought Jack Cooper, it was, I think, May 2009. Which was a pretty interesting time to sort of double and triple down on car haul from our relatively smaller business before that. So because we were in the Great Recession, because we were in so much turmoil in the industry, and because of all of those things, didn't have a lot of cash laying around to actually buy hundreds of new trucks, we did what nerds do, and we used math. And we created a proprietary algorithm that would help us determine optimal routing, particularly for backhaul and filling up empty miles in our network, that we call the Da Vinci tool. So it takes into account, maybe a dozen factors: hours of service, the permutation of tractor-trailer combination that the driver is driving, the economics of the freight, et cetera. And so, that was sort of a light bulb moment for us, where we were able to see the power of technology to make us better at our jobs for our customers. And we've extended that in the last year. And as JS was talking, the thing that came to my mind is, I don't see why we can't share geolocation data on units sometimes, right? And maybe you have a hot zone where these are things that are having trouble reaching the western edge of a network or the northern edge of a network. I think our GeoTab program, which basically allows us to see the GPS location of everything, particularly those off-site lots that we've been using in the supply chain flux, I think has been really helpful to us. It would be great to see that standardized so that we can work more effectively with our partners in the chain. But I think the next generation of it is going to have to be prioritizing how we share that information, and again, kind of taking that leap of faith that we're not going to use it to beat each other about the Head and Shoulders.
JS, any reaction there? Is that an interesting idea for you in terms of the shared geolocations?
Definitely interesting. I think, you don't want to beat anyone around the Head and Shoulders if they meet their KPI.
But if they don't, it is fair game.
But that's actually interesting too, right? Because sometimes, because the data is formatted so differently and because you don't have a standardized reciprocal of sort of all those data points, the KPIs look different from 3 different points of view, right? The OE has one, 3PL might have another, we might have another, rail might even have another. And then you're all sort of sitting there saying, these are finite quantities, right? They're actual VINs. We should all be able to have the same numbers on these KPIs. And so again, I think that actually just furthers the case for better sharing of data.
Well, you also made the point earlier, Sarah, about if the structure of, you actually in a way disincentivized from filling some of those backcalls, and the KPI might actually look worse on a different metric.
Yeah,
So
or say there's a carrier at a location, right? This happens, JS has probably seen this, I know Bill has, where you need an incremental lift or capacity and you have a broker or purchase transportation operation on the site, and other carriers will sit back and say, nope, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. Well, yeah, you do, but what they're waiting on is to get to the spot buy market where they get a better rate.
Yes.
And that hurts all of us. And again, data sharing, Sunshine to me is the best disinfectant for that kind of disincentive to play nice in the sandbox.
Absolutely, and that's something, we work with both Jack Cooper and RPM, but I'll say in particular, we've been talking to RPM about how we can somehow give more transparency to the spot buy market and incentivize our core carriers to participate rather than sit back and wait. And how do we do it in a way that works for both the carriers and the OEMs? And I think technology is a big part of that solution. We're excited about working with all of you to improve the spot buy market.
And these workshops that we've been involved in with the OEMs have been very enlightening, right? You go back to saying geobaying. Do you imagine if you had visibility at every rail ramp and every port? It's not just about moving maybe JS's cars. I can move JS's cars and somebody else's cars, because in a lot of ways they're going to the same place, right? And not have to wait for maybe you to have a full load for us to be able to move. So having that ability, we got to find a way to do it, because there's a lot of good companies out here that provide good metrics, haul-away companies that work hard every day, but we don't have visibility to what's out there.
Yeah, and we have the space to do this right now.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, in a few years, this is going to be much harder with EVs,
Yep.
right? Because they tend to be heavier. And let's assume you only pick up 6,000 pounds per load in weight. That's still 7.5% of your capacity at a weight limit of 80,000 pounds. And so when we start hitting a higher percentage of our mix being EVs, and that's before we can even get to the point of delivering on zero emissions trucks, to make sure your customers who want those clean zero emissions cars don't have them delivered on diesels, right? We've got this window of opportunity to try to problem solve before that really makes innovation, I think, a little bit more challenging as we're all dealing with another blip in the supply chain.
That's a key point.
And Chris,
Yeah,
if we're
please.
dealing with capacity now, what's going to happen when we go to 16, 17 million cars, right? Plus we have a new EV segment, which is, for a lot of the OEMs, is being treated separately, right? And then the used car market, which has been non-existent really in the last couple of years, and that comes back. We have to do a better job at planning for the future.
It's an important point for sure. Questions, comments from the audience? I know we've deprived you of coffee for a little while, but and I promise it's coming not too far. But does anybody have any comments, questions they want to put to our panel? Yes, right in the back. I should explain the box. Yes, we throw it around. You can throw it right back at my colleague when you're done.
Colin Evans with Cognosis. I've heard a lot of discussions about using data and sharing data. Have there been any internal initiatives to look at the quality of the data? A lot of these systems have been legacy systems that haven't really grown over the past few decades and years. Have you had a lot of issues with using antiquated data systems now in this more connected world?
JS, maybe you can start on that. I know there's been a lot of work at Nissan on the system side.
Yeah, I think traditionally, particularly within supply chain, we have relied on 3PLs and partners to manage the data systems. And over the last 5 years, we've made a pretty significant strategic decision that actually the data is one of the most important things that needs to be owned and managed by Nissan. So we have been bringing systems in-house, either creating them ourselves or working with a software as a service provider to help us build those. But yes, we see modernizing systems as absolutely critical, and we also see them as a core function of the OEM to own them, which is a change from the past. And see that across supply chain, inbound parts to obviously vehicle logistics.
But for the Da Vinci tool, is the quality of data standards been an issue going into that, or we talked about the different formats earlier? Is that something that Jack Cooper is focused on too?
No, I mean, I think any data tool, and especially as we move into the universe of machine learning and AI, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So the quality of the data upstream always matters, but Cognosis, as you know, Curtis Rhodes, head of our network planning, is a huge fan. And I think those kinds of tools and making sure that we don't, as you take more of that responsibility on, become slackers on our end. We're still also responsible for knowing what we're doing, right? So I think it's going to be critical. I think JS is spot on here.
Great. Any other questions, comments from the audience? Okay. So I think, Bill, you raised the point on I think return to volumes. You raised the used market, auction side. Is there more opportunity as that happens, or should we be looking much more carefully at how we can combine some of these flows, whether that's new and used, or even, dare I say, the co-loading concepts that we've talked about for many decades, I think.
How long have we been talking about co-loading?
Well, how long have you been in the industry for? Longer than that, I think, but go on.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's out there. The opportunity exists, right, to be able to do a better job of planning if you have, and I hate to use that word again, but the visibility. But you know, I've done a lot of work with AIAG over the years at Automotive Industry Action Group, and you know, whether it's there or through ALEC or through somewhere, we have to figure out how to manage the capacity, because again, used, new, whatever, they're all selling it to the same markets, and you know, so I don't have an answer for it, Chris.
Yeah.
I wish I did.
Yeah. Just, I mean, you know, are you open to these tools? Are you looking at these solutions with your carriers and partners?
Yes, very open to it. Like I said, we have a mindset of we have to do things differently.
Yeah.
So I think one thing I would add is we've been talking at Nissan a lot about how do we be a good customer to all of you, and what does it mean to be a good customer to the carriers? And I think some of that is being flexible, willing to think outside the box. Some of it is relationships, some of it's data. Some of it's just, what are the pain points, and are they things that we can help with? And you know, we talk to carriers, some of you in this room, who are frustrated with dealer hours. Okay, we can go work on that on our side. We talk to carriers who are frustrated with conditions at maybe some of our pickup points. You know, there's not good lighting. Tell us that, and we want to fix it. You know, let's not just sit here and say, okay, here's the KPIs. Everyone's sitting on each side of the table frustrated with one another. Let's be those solution finders.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think capacity planning is going to be most of our jobs for the next 5 to 10 years, particularly as EVs take off. You know, I think it is as volumes come back, and believe me, nobody is more excited than your carriers about the OEs coming back online full speed ahead. Consumers love these products. They love to buy these products, right? So it's exciting when that comes back. But we are looking at a fundamentally different universe for finished vehicle logistics now. And I do think, you know, not everyone is going to go out and spend $200,000 or $300,000 per rig for hundreds of trucks. Not everyone is going to be able to keep 95% of their drivers or to find new drivers to bring into the fold. And as we think about that, the solution can't just be that we put more trucks on the road and more butts and seats for drivers. I do think we're going to have to look at joining the 21st century when it comes to weight limits on car haul rigs. The reality is, if any of you live near a port, there are what's called non-divisible loads, right? Leaving those containers, the containers leaving those ports at 100,000 pounds fully loaded, right? There are heavy haul and all kinds of other exemptions in that 80,000 pound weight limit for Class 8 trucks. And the question has always been, how do we do this in a way that's safe? And the pandemic actually gifted us with a way to see that, because we managed to get Gavin Newsom, right, the liberal lion of the left coast, and Governor Brian Kemp in my home state, who is all the way to the right, to agree on only one thing politically that I've ever seen, which is giving increased weight to trucks. So during the pandemic, Governor Newsom had a 10% weight variance coming out of the ports to make sure they could relieve congestion, and it worked. Brian Kemp went all the way up to 95,000 pounds for all trucks in the state of Georgia, and it helped as well. And what's interesting to me as a carrier looking at this issue is that in both cases, there is zero, and I mean absolutely no data that shows there was any reason those two programs created safety concerns for the people with whom we share the road. So now, rather than debating it in some theoretical venue, we can actually go and look at facts and decide how to do this in a way that helps our customers, provides incremental capacity, gets ahead of the crisis in the EV supply chain universe, and does the right thing by not having more trucks, more emissions, more wear and tear on our infrastructure, and more traffic. I mean, this is a win for everybody, and we have got to be focused on those kind of innovations as we do exactly what Bill said and look at capacity in the years ahead.
And to echo what JS was saying, we have to again look at these day-to-day things we've been dealing with for years, as far as hours of availability to pick up vehicles, hours of availability to drop vehicles, inspections. Mm-hmm. How about the end of the month and the end of the quarter push that we still have to deal with everybody? I mean, that's not a logistical problem. That's a finance problem that is forced upon all of us in this room. I mean, is that something we can look at? I mean, God knows we got to get the accountants in the room now too, right? But it's something that we have to examine.
And we don't have that many empty seats, but we'll try. We'll try. I know we're running a bit over time. I'll maybe do one last question to the panel before we go to coffee, and it's to look ahead a little bit. 5 years' time, along with the great hope of bipartisan agreement on load factors, which who would have thought that would bring it together. 5 years' time, what does an efficient, holistic, finished vehicle logistic network look like to you, or at least by then, what could we have achieved? JS, over the next 3 to 5 years, what are some key things you want to see when we have you back to talking about it then?
So caveat, my bad jokes also attributable to AI, but everyone says, oh, EVs are coming, and at Nissan it's like we've been shipping the Leaf for more than 10 years. Yeah. EVs are here, and we have a lot of experience shipping them. However, I do think weight is going to be an issue, but there's also really exciting new technology that's going to help us overcome other challenges. Self-driving vehicles, autonomy of vehicles on yards, driving themselves to load onto a truck. I think maybe more 10 years down the line, but I actually am very optimistic that there's a lot of things right on the horizon that are going to change the industry and make it more efficient for everyone.
Yeah, exciting. Bill?
5 years from now, I mean, I've been very fortunate to work for RPM for this past year, and we have something called Marketplace. Mm-hmm. I think 5 years from now, I would like to be able to see where 80% of the cars can move via some sort of machine learning, right? One computer talking to another computer. It may be your computer talking to me.
And our car's computers.
And our car's computers, right?
Yeah.
And then we use the really smart people in this room for the 20% of the stuff that kind of, I would say, the exception management, the stuff that we need to solve every day, which comes up, which is never going to change, right? So that's where I see, I hope, in 5 years.
In 5 years, I hope our focus is pride and stability. I hope that we have a generation of truck drivers we're bringing into the industry who are proud to be a part of this incredible American innovation that's driven our economy, for more than a century, right? Like, I want them to be proud in finished vehicle logistics. I want them to be proud of the beautiful, gleaming new units that are on their rig and the environmentally responsible truck that they're driving. And on the stability front, I want all of us to come to the table and leave the table at every negotiation feeling like we all got a good deal, where the OEs don't feel like they were gouged or taken advantage of, but the carriers don't feel like we're being asked to push ourselves to the brink of extinction to rescue a supply chain that's in chaos, not because of us. And I think having that long-term view about how do we create the right way to move these products so that Americans and people all over the world can enjoy owning them and driving them, that's the priority. So pride and stability for me.
I think optimistic, hopeful views of the future, something for us to take forward. I know 2028 will also be an election year, so if any of you are considering a run, I think you'll have my vote. So thank you very much for sharing with us, for again continuing our conversation. I think we had some really important takeaways. It's such a joy to be here with you. Thank you so much, Sarah, Bill, JS. We look forward to the rest of the days with you. Thank you.